Today's daf we're going to learn is Yoma Nun Bet. Today's shiur is dedicated by Judy Shapiro and the upcoming birthdays of her grandchildren, Matan and Yakira in Baltimore, second birthday, and Adin Avraham in Jerusalem, first birthday. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to start at the bottom of yesterday's daf. I want to do a quick review of what we saw in the different opinions about what the Kohen Gadol's path is. If you had the early version of the picture, there was a mistake in my picture that I fixed after on the sheet from yesterday. So now the new version is up on the site. I just had the directions wrong. Anyway, I fixed that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the path the Kohen Gadol takes. So there were three approaches to this path, three different approaches to how he goes. In fact, today I did a little picture here. I can pull it up. Okay, here we have a picture of the three paths in red, in blue, and in orange. Okay, so either we have Rabbi Yehuda, who says he goes Bein HaMizbeach LeMenorah. So again, he walks into the room kind of centered. Then when he gets to the altar, he has to either go left or right, left toward the south or right toward the north. He goes, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to the left, between the Mizbeach and the menorah. Why? Because assuming, now this picture was a little tricky because you either have to paint it with one parochet or two parochot. So I put two, but we can imagine, I'm in Word now, I can delete it. Theoretically, we could just take this one away and then you'll see it without. So right now, he walks in, we have two parochot. The parochet, always we're going to assume the inner parochet, or if there's only one, then the one parochet opens on the north, because we talked about the north is the more important side. So if we're going to have two, there's going to be an opening on the north for the inner one, but an opening for the parochet on the south for the outer one. So therefore, he's going to walk on the south side of the room between the Mizbeach and the menorah. And then when he gets to the end there, he's going to turn toward the wall and walk into that entrance. That's Rabbi Yehuda. I'm going to skip to the last opinion, Yesh Omrim, Ben Shulchan Lakotel. He goes the other way, number one. He goes right instead of left. He goes to the north. Then he, instead of going in between the altar and the table, he goes all the way to the wall. And then, again, let's just take out this, or we could delete this line, this parochet. And then what happens? Sorry, it's not working. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. Delete the parochet, because there's only one parochet according to Rabbi Yossi, and he walks straight into Kodesh Kodashim. To which we gave Rabbi Meir, who's the middle opinion, and he says, no. It's true you walk on the north side, but you have to walk in between the Mizbeach and the Shulchan, not up against the wall. And then we gave two different reasons, either because there's 10 tables that are lined up going in the north-south direction. So they basically cover half the room from the wall going down halfway through the room, in which case you can't walk up against the wall. So you're going to have to kind of zigzag your way around, but you can't walk up against the wall. And then it's just a practical reason. Or is it that we don't want you taking this path, this orange path that Rabbi Yossi laid out, because then the whole time you're walking, it's open to Kodesh Kodashim. That's not respectful for God, that you're going to be basically walking straight into Kodesh Kodashim. So therefore, those are the three different options. Now we're going to have a little bit more discussion between them. What's Rabbi Yossi going to answer to that question that Rabbi Meir said, which is, we don't want you walking straight into the Kodesh Kodashim? Rabbi Yossi Amar Lecha Chavivim Yisrael Shelo Etzlichana Katuv L'Shaliach. The people are so beloved right now that they don't need a shaliach, meaning they can walk straight in, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Sometimes there's a sha'ah that the Jews are more chaviv, or the Kohen Gadol on this day. There's not a problem of him going and looking straight into the Kodesh Kodashim. Rabbi Yehuda Nami, now what about Rabbi Yehuda? The first opinion, which was go between the Mizbeach and the menorah. Now, really, okay, let's bring back our parochet. Since you want to go straight into that entrance, like the whole reason you're going on that side is because the entrance is on the south side. So why would you walk between the Mizbeach and the menorah? Why wouldn't you walk? Okay, let's move the arrow down. Why wouldn't you walk all the way against the wall, between the menorah and the wall, just like Rabbi Yossi said? And here you don't have to worry that Kodesh Kodashim is exposed to him, because it's not, because he's going to see what's in front of him, the parochet, the second parochet. So it should be a problem. So now they say, because remember, Rabbi Yehuda holds there's two. So Rabbi Yehuda Nami, Neo Ben Menorah Lakotel. So what's the reason we don't do it that way? Great answer. Again, we get into practically, it's going to be a problem. Mishchare Mane. his clothes are going to get black. If he walks up against that wall, what's the problem with that wall? The wall is right next to the menorah. You don't have this problem on the shulchan side where the table is. But here, between the menorah and the wall, what happens? We all know that if you have a menorah going and you have it burning all the time, the wall is going to get blackened from the fire. So if the wall is blackened and the Kohen's wearing his nice white clothes that we're always so concerned about, these clothes look nice and presentable and they're clean, and then he's going to get them full of black from all the soot on the wall, that's going to be a problem. That's why he doesn't walk next to the wall. Again, we get into practicality. Okay, I want to just point out, and this happens in our daf, we're going to end with this also, and that there's all these issues all the time in our Masechet. We live between a world where the temple is this high and mighty and in a different world and physically different and from, a machshava perspective, right? Jewish thought, like what's happening, and he's going to God, and how does he go to God, and does he, how can he approach God, and all that lofty speech and talk and conversations and opinions, to the mundane and the practical, getting to the nitty gritty details, starting with the beginning of the Masechet with jealousy between people. And it's not all high and lofty. There's human emotions going on here. There's practical, his clothes, they're going to get dirty, right? And all those very practical issues that come up. So the Mikdash is this amazing balance between both of those elements, the mundane and the practical. How do we do this? Technically speaking, what is it possible to do these things? And the lofty world of, how do we greet God? How do we behave in the house of God? And that this is the house of God, and it's not a regular house. It's not like, okay, my house, and I might get dirty if I walk near the wall. No, we're talking about something else entirely. And there's that interplay, which is so fascinating. And you really see that on today's daf and, from yesterday as well. So now we have another question. Amar Rabbanit, Amat Traksin, lo echriu bo chachamim, ike lifnim, ike lechutz. This amah of separation, that was exactly this space between the two parochot in Bayit Sheni, and it was a wall in Bayit Rishon. Remember, we talked about it couldn't be a wall in Bayit Sheni because it was too high. But that one amma of space, the Chachamim didn't know what to say. Is this kilifnin, kilachutz? Is it like the inside or is it like the outside? Meaning, is it like the sanctuary or is it like the Kodesh Kodeshim? And we don't exactly understand what he even means. Is it like this? Is it like that? We're going to have to understand what his question is. So Matkifla Ravina says, my taima, what's concerning you? And he's going to bring a possibility that, are we assuming this is your question? And if so, he's going to say, no, that's not your question. And I'll tell you why. Ilema mishum dichtiv v'habayit asher bana Shlomo la'Hashem 60 amah orko ve'esrim rochbo u'shloshim amah komato. Is it because it says in the verse, the house that Shlomo built, which is basically the sanctuary and the Kodesh Kodeshim, is 60 cubits, okay, right? It's 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Remember, that's what we said. It was 30 in Bayit Rishon and 40 in Bayit Sheni, which is why the wall had to be thicker than one amma. Uchtiv, and it also says there, arba'im ba'amah haya habayit. It was 40. Okay, now, so let's just pull up the picture. So here we have, okay, the hechal of this 60, that includes the hechal and the Kodesh Kodeshim. 40 is the hechal, and 20, right? Arba'im ba'amah haya habayit hu hechal lefanai, right? So that's the first part, which is 40. What's left? 20. Uchtiv lefnei hadvil, before the separation, meaning on the other side of the separation, really, 20 amah orech ve'esrim amah rocha ve'esrim amah komato. So it describes the numbers. There's 20 in Kodesh Kodeshim, 40 cubits of the Heichal. This whole time we're talking about the length. Okay, that's why the picture is really helpful. You can find it on the daf post also, and it's also in the sheet. Made it very clear so you can see it. Now, v'lo yadina, and is this your question? Which is going to say basically this can't be your question. Lo yadina namat chaksin imehane yasrim v'imehane arba'im. Is your question that when we talk about, they said the whole room was 60, 40 for the Heichal, 40 for the Kodesh Kodeshim. Notice they didn't say how much the parochet was, right? It should have said 39 plus 1 plus 20, or 40 plus 19 plus 1, or plus 1 plus 19, right? It doesn't say that. So the question is it included in the 20 of the Kodesh Kodeshim, or is included in the 40 of the Heichal? If that's your question, that can't be the question. It's definitely not either. And you can see from the picture already that this is one, okay, if you can see this well, this is one in addition to the 40 and the 20, which is a little bit weird because it said the whole room is 60, but really the room was 61, okay? Kind of throws off everything we've always thought. The room is really 61 altogether. And this is what he's going to say. Maybe it's not part of that 20 and not part of that 40. When it gave us the midot of 60 by 20, it was talking about 60 of space and not 60 of wall. It ignored, not the space of the wall. It left out the space of the wall. So this room is really 61 by 20. It just didn't count the walls. Okay, so there's this one wall here of the parochet, which basically is in addition to the 60. So really, in other words, we're going to say it clearly didn't count the walls. It was only counting space. Let's say you would say usable space rather than a space that was taken up by a wall. Okay, right? You never do that in architecture. If you were counting, you wouldn't ignore the wall. But they're saying that when they talked about the 60, they weren't using, it wasn't to give you an architectural diagram. It was to describe how much space was there to use in the Heichal and how much space was there to use in the Kodesh Kodeshim. That had 40, that had 20. How do we know that that's the way it is? Because he's now going to prove it from Mishneh Midot, and this is what the picture is for. So he said, Teda, and I'll prove it to you. Anytime they talk about walls, they give, and anytime they talk about measurements in the temple, the walls are mentioned separately. They're not considered part of the space. They have a separate number for them. And we're going to see it right now. Ditnan, as it says in the Mishneh Midot. It was 100 by 100 with a height of 100. Kotel ulam chamesh. Okay, the wall on the entrance was 5. Okay, so now you go in from the east. Okay, we're looking from the east here. North is at the top, south is at the bottom, right? Other than those, right? These are different from the maps of the Machon HaMikdash, which are flipped, which I really haven't figured out why they're flipped. It just confuses us. I drew this north-south. So you start with the ulam. Remember, that's this antechamber, the front hall that you get into in order to get into the sanctuary. Before you get to that front hall, there's a wall around it because this now is a building, if you remember. Right? The other stuff was open. This is a building. There's a wall before you get into the ulam. So that wall is 5 cubits. We're going to see that some of the walls were 5 cubits, some of the walls were 6, other than this parochet, which is obviously only 1. So kol ulam is 5. V'ha'ulam 11. Okay, we're now trying to get to that number 100. Okay, so you can do the math yourself. It's very simple, so I'm not going to add it all up, each thing one at a time, but you can do it yourself as we go on. The kotel of the wall is 5. Then the ulam itself, the length of that room is 11 cubits. Ha'ulam, so that's 11. Kotel ha'echal, now you get to the wall between the ulam and the hechal. It's really the wall of the hechal. The sanctuary is 6. That wall, there's 5 cubit walls, I told you, and 6 cubit walls. This one's 6 cubits. Ve'orko, the room itself is 40 amah, 40 cubits. Ve'amah traksin, oh, notice they count this as separately, not part of the 40 and not part of the 20. V'kaf amah ben kodesh kodeshim, and then there's 20 for the kodesh kodeshim, Beit kodesh kodeshim. There's 20 cubits of the kodesh kodeshim itself. Now, behind this, the Heichal had a wall on one side, obviously has a wall on all its sides. So there's another wall here. That wall is the same as the wall on the other side. Kotel Heichal Sheish. Hata, there were these compartments where they put all sorts of things. We're not going to get into that now. We'll see it in Masechet Midot, maybe otherwise also. But the Ta had 6 cubits, Sheish. V'kotel Atan, the wall around it, which is really the same as the wall around the Ulam, it goes basically around the entire building, is so therefore it's the same as the starting one, which is 5. So if you add all that up and you include the ones separately, you'll get to 100. If the one is included in the 40 or the 20, you will not get to 100. And what do you see here? You see here, number 1, they counted the wall separately. And number 2, you see that they counted all the walls separately. When they talk about the space, they're talking only about the space of the inside of the room and not the walls of the room. So there you have it. Ella. So therefore, the question can't be, is it part of Kodesh Kodeshim or is it part of the Heichal? It's definitely not part of either. That's clear. Okay, so now the question is, he explains, Ravina, he says, Ella, here's your question. The question is, what's the status of that space? This is like when you have no man's land, right? We have this in Israel a lot, the borders with our neighbors. There's space that doesn't belong to anybody, okay? But the question is, that no man's land, which is neither the Heichal nor the Kodesh Kodeshim, it's got to have some level of kedusha to it because it's in the space where it's the most holy area. The question is, which level of sanctity does it have? But for sure, it's not considered in the count of either that room or that room. It's clearly not Kodesh Kodeshim, and it's clearly not the Heichal. The question is just what's its level of sanctity? Is it like that one or like that one? And that was the question that they don't know the answer to, that they questioned. Now, the Amat Raksin, I see you're asking. I didn't see the other questions because when I'm on share screen, I can't read the chat. So anyway, sorry, we can look at them after class, but I see your question now. The Amat Raksin includes each parochet and the space in between, the whole area between it's both the parochot and the space in between all together took up an amma, 1 cubit of space. So now he tells us, and by the way, Hainu de Amma Rabbi Yochanan, this is exactly what Rabbi Yochanan said, because Rabbi Yochanan said, the Bai Yosef Ish Hutzel, who was a Tana. Rabbi Yochanan said there was a Tana, Yosef Ish Hutzel, who asked the following question. And it's all about how to read a verse in Sefer Melachim when it describes the temple. Udvir betoch habayit mipnima haychin lititen sham et aron brit Hashem. This dvir betoch habayit, there's this partition in the house, mipnima, from the inside. It was prepared to put the aron beit Hashem. Okay, how to read this word mipnima is a big debate. I specifically didn't explain it very well because here's his question. Ibaylehu. How does the pasuk read? Now we know that there's what's called ta'amei mikra. That means ta'amei mikra, which tell you, the sounds, how to read it, how to lane it, but it also tells you where the breaks are, where to stop, where to start. Not only that, we also know where a verse starts, where a verse ends. But if you open a Sefer Torah if you had a cloth, it doesn't have the psukim, it doesn't have where the breaks are, it doesn't have anything. All that was passed down by tradition. We're going to see now a slew of cases where it's not clear how to read a verse. Obviously, if you looked at the Tamei Mikra in that pasuk, the ones that we have obviously show one way of reading it. But there were obviously in their time different approaches. And even in one case, we're going to have a different pasuk break, where the verse starts and where the verse ends. That's going to even be a subject of debate, which is just interesting to us because we open it and you see exactly what verse, where it is. But that chalukat to psukim, the separation into verses, wasn't so clear cut in those days. You can see that there was a bit of a debate about certain cases. So now he asked the following question. First, we're just on our pasuk, then we'll get to some others. So udvir b'toch habayit, does it read like this? Mipnima, there's a separation between the house. Mipnima yichen liten sham. There's this separation in the house, and on the inside of that, hachen liten sham. Past the partition, that's called the Kodesh Kodeshim, meaning that mipnima means beyond the partition. That means the partition is considered part of the sanctuary, or at least in terms of sanctity, it's got the level of the sanctuary. Or do we say, oh, dilma hachi kamar, udvir b'toch habayit mipnima. There's a separation that's on the inside. That's like the Kodesh Kodeshim. In other words, this separation is mipnima. It's from the inside, meaning it's part of the Kodesh Kodeshim. And then it says, Hechin sham litihain sham, right? And then from there, they with beyond that separation, they put it, but the separation itself is mipnima, is on the inside. So there's two ways to read that. That's a question that Yosef Ish Hutzel asked, and Rabbi Yochanan quoted it, and Ravina uses that as his proof that that's the debate here. Is it considered the sanctity of the inner area, or is it considered the sanctity of the outer area? And it might depend on how you read that verse. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. Is Yosef Ish Hutzel really think that verse could be read in two different ways? The Tanya, doesn't it say in a Braita, Isi ben Yehuda Omer? Now, you might say Isi ben Yehuda is someone else, and why do we care what he says? But we're going to see later on that the Gemara is going to say that Yosef Ish Hutzel and Isi ben Yehuda were the same person. They just had different names. Not only did he have two names, he had, I don't remember how many, but maybe 7 names. Okay, we're going to see he had a lot of different names. Wasn't so clear. For whatever reason, he was called a whole bunch of different names. Maybe 7 is an exaggeration, but we'll see. He's got a whole list of names, and it's really the same person. And what does he say elsewhere? And that's going to create a contradiction here. There's 5 verses in the Torah that we don't know how to read them. And here they are. Se'et, Meshukadim, Machar, Arol, Vikam. Those are the 5 psukim. And therefore, what's the problem? And I'll just read on one more minute, and then I'll go back to explaining what all these psukim are. Vahatanya, Hu Yosef Ish Hutzel, here I'll count right now. That's 1. Hu Yosef Habavli, that's 2. Hu Isi ben Yehuda, 3. Hu Isi ben Gor Aryeh, that's 4. Gor Aryeh Yehuda, you could see that would be interchangeable. Habavli, he was called by his, right, where he came from. Yosef and Isi maybe are similar. Maybe it's a nickname for Yosef. Hu Isi ben Gamliel. Okay, why Gamliel? Maybe Yehuda was from the Gamliel family. Maybe he gets called by, he was Yehuda ben Gamliel maybe. Hu Isi ben Mahalalel. Okay, why he also gets called maybe from Hillel. Remember the whole family. There was Yehuda, Gamliel, Hillel. It's all from the same family. Umashmo Isi ben Akiva Shmo. I was right. There were 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, he had 7 names. His real name was Isi ben Akiva. Okay, and therefore, if he says there's only 5, he didn't mention this one as one of them. So I'll already get to the answer so you don't lose sight of where we're going, and then we'll get back to what those 5 were. The Gemara answers, he said there's 5 psukim in the Torah. Torah is 5 chumashim, right? Not Sefer Melachim. When he said there's only 5, he was talking about in the Torah. There could be other ones in the Nevi'im. Okay, and that resolves our problem. Okay, let's look now at these psukim. Okay, so now we're going to go through all the verses in the Torah that can be read in 2 different ways because they don't really tell us what they are. They just say the word. So now let's see. The first one is from Breshit Daled Pasuk Zayin, very famous section with Cain. After he kills Hevel, right? God is very upset with him. And then God says to him, right? Lama naflu panecha, why is your head down? Halo im tetiv se'et, ve'im lo tetiv lepetach hatat rovetz ve'elechat shukato v'atatim shobo. If you do good, then se'et, I will forgive you. In other words, the choice is in front of you. If you do good, right? This sounds like our Shnei Seirim and what we discussed. You have a choice. You can do good and I'll forgive you. Ve'im lo tetiv, but if you don't, lepetach hatat rovetz, sin will follow you everywhere you go. Elechat shukato, you'll constantly be fighting against it. Vatatim sholbo, you can still rule over it, but basically it's going to chase you your whole life. That's one way of reading it. Halo, the second way of reading it is that the se'et goes on the second part of the verse. Halo im tetiv. And then se'et ve'im lo tetiv lepetach hatat rovetz ve'elechat shukato vatatim sholbo. Grammatically, it doesn't sound so good, but they basically say that the se'et is not se'et, I will carry away your sins, I will forgive you. You will bear your sins with you always. Se'et v'im lo tetiv, and as if you don't do good, you'll constantly be carrying this. Lepetach hatat rovetz ve'elechat shukato. That's one way of reading it. Now, the meaning is not so different. What's different about it is, what does se'et mean? Se'et in the first verse means forgiving and kind of removing it. Se'et in the second is, it will always be remembered. You'll carry it with you all the time. Some people say that it actually means why is your head down? It sort of doesn't matter. Im tetiv and lo tetiv, sin is always going to be at your hands. You're always going to have to fight against it. But you do have the power to get over it if you want. That's a different possible reading. Okay, next. Shmot Perek Kafei Pasuk Lamed Daled. This is a little simpler. Uba menorah. We're talking about the description of the menorah in the temple. Arba'a gvi'im v'shukadim. There's 4 cups that all have designs of shkedim on them, almonds. Kaftoreh u'pracheh, and then it has these kaftorim and prachim on them, and everything is describing the gvi'im, those cups, what they have on them. They have these designs, and then they have these flowers, and they have the kaftorim. Exactly how you describe kaftorim is a question. I'm leaving that aside right now. The second is, uba menorah arba'a gvi'im mishukadim kaftoreh u'pracheh. The kaftorim and the prachim are mishukadim. It's describing the flowers and the kaftorim that are on it, but not the cups. Okay, not the vials that hold the oil. So again, it depends. This is like a misplaced modifier, right? It's not clear what it's describing. Shmo Perek Yud Zayin Pasuk Yud Tet. Now we're in Milchemet Amalek. This is the word machal. Vayomer Moshe Yoshua. Moshe says to Yoshua, Bechar lanu anashim v'tzei lachem b'Amalek machal. Choose people and go out to war tomorrow, right? He's telling him today, prepare for tomorrow. You've prepared for war for tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm going up and I'm going to pray for you, which could be I'm going to pray for you right now. It's not clear. Or when you go to war, I'll pray for you. Second reading is, stop, which means go now. Take people and go fight today. Tomorrow, I will go stand at the top of the mountain and with the Mateh of God, and I will pray for you. A little bit strange why he'd be praying tomorrow and not today, right? It's a good question, but anyway, that's how to read that. This next one is the one that I mentioned, that it's about where the word goes. Is it part of Pasuk Vav or is it part of Pasuk Zayin? And we're moving now to Bereshit Perek Mem Tet, which is this section where Yaakov is giving blessings, and in this case, not exactly a blessing, to his sons. We're up to Shimon and Levi. It says, "B'sodam al tavo nafshi." I'm not going to be involved in their secretive actions. Al tichad b'ka'alam al tichad kvodi. When they get together, I don't want my kavod to be there, right? I don't want to be anywhere near them. Ki ba'apam hargu ish, because in their anger they killed someone. Ubirtzonam iklu shur, and based on their whatever they wanted, they killed an ox also, which it's not clear what this ox is exactly, but that's what he says. Maybe it also just shows how strong and mighty they are that they kill oxen. Arur apam kiaz, cursed is their anger because it's so strong. Be'evratam, which is another word for anger, ki kashata, it's so harsh. I will divide them in among the Jewish people. Basically, I'll scatter them about. The second reading is, they killed the shore, the ox of a cursed person. Who's cursed? Well, Arur Canaan, if you remember from the beginning of this book, it says that Canaan will be cursed in Parshat Noach. And so who's Canaan? Shechem comes from Canaan. They, in the context of the whole battle against Shechem, they also killed the animals of Shechem. And then Apam Kiaz is just describing their anger. Their anger is so harsh. It's so severe, but not saying cursed is their anger. It's just saying it is. Then he says, I'm going to punish, you're going to be punished for this, but he doesn't say you're cursed. Okay, the curse is referring to the opposite. Last verse for now, we'll have one final one later. In Dvarim, Perek Lamed Aleph, the end of the Torah, Moshe says, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe, God says to Moshe, Hincha shochevim b'avatecha v'kam, you're going to die, and then you'll get up. And then it says, Ha'am hazeh v'zanach harei Elohei nechar, and when it comes to this nation, they're going to go follow non-Jew, their idols, blah, 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 etc. And they're going to break the contract that we had. The second reading, and I'll get back to the first reading in a minute, I'll explain it. This, I think, has the most significance, this difference. You're going to die. And when you die, they're going to get up and they're going to go start worshiping idols. Now, what's the difference? The first verse says, you're going to die and you're going to get up. What does that mean? You're going to die. You're not going to get up. So what does it mean? It's Tchiyat HaMetim. This is the resurrection of the dead. God, and here you have, why is it so significant? Because then there's a verse that basically says there's resurrection of the dead in the Torah. It says you're going to die and you're going to come back to life. And that's what he's telling Moshe. So depending on how you read that verse or not, would tell you whether there's Tchiyat HaMetim from the Torah or not. So those are very interesting psukim. Some of them, the differences were more severe. Some of them, there's less ramifications to the difference. So anyway, back to our Gemara. So the Gemara said, okay, that doesn't bother us that Isi ben Yehuda said that, and Yosef Yeshutzel, who's the same person, also said there's a verse in the Nevi'im, because that's Nevi'im, that's Torah. Okay, fine. But then they say, wait a minute, B'dorai Taleka, but there isn't in the Torah also. There's another one. V'ha'ika debai Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda asked a question on the following pasuk. Okay, now we're moving to the psukim about the Jews after Matan Torah. It says they did. Vayishlach et na'arei b'nei Yisrael. We're in Shmo Perek Kavdaled Pasuk Kafei. Vayishlach et na'arei b'nei Yisrael vayalu olot vayizbechu zvachim shlamim laHashem parim. It says they brought burnt offerings and they burnt peace offerings. They brought peace offerings laHashem, and then it describes one type of animal. It says they were bulls. Now, if you read it, that you take a break after the first half, it says they brought olot. Then you could say that maybe they brought olot, and this is what we'll read inside. Is it Vayishlach na'arei b'nei Yisrael vayalu olot kvasim? They brought sheep and in the sheep family. Vayizbechu zvachim shlamim parim. And the shlamim were bulls. O Dilma idividi parim. Or do you read it as Vayishlach na'arei b'nei Yisrael vayalu? Right, and then you put the break after b'nei Yisrael. He sent the na'arei b'nei Yisrael, and what did they do? Yalu olot vayizbechu zvachim shlamim laHashem. Right, they did olot, they did shlamim. Parim, and parim defines both the first part and the second part, both the olot and the shlamim, and that it was only bulls. So he also has a sixth pasuk. So how does Isi ben Yehuda relate to that? Basically, say very simply, why you bring a question from Rav Chisda? The Rav Chisda misapkale, Isi ben Yehuda pshitale. something that was obvious to Isi ben Yehuda, but it wasn't obvious to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda had a question how to read it. Isi ben Yehuda thought it was a very clear reading. We don't know what he thought, but he read it in one way, and he didn't think that this pasuk could have been read in two different ways, and therefore it doesn't question the fact that he said that there were 5. It doesn't mean there aren't more. It just means he didn't think that there were any more. Okay, now we finally get to the moment we've been waiting for this entire Masechet. I mean, maybe others might be waiting for the 8th chapter, which is all about the fasting on Yom Kippur, which is maybe a little more relevant. But at least if you're infatuated or interested in the Avodat Yom Kippurim, the most important part is now to come. And what's great about it is we have pictures because that really makes it come alive. So with that, I'm going to put up the pictures and we're going to start watching the Kohen Gadol and what he does. So now, assuming, okay, he's going in on, we're going to assume now there were 2 parochot because we're going by Tanakam in the previous Mishnah, which means we only have one option. He walked between the altar and the menorah on the south side. And then, right, he's going straight this way. And then he makes a left turn and he goes into the parochet, right? The first parochet opening. Hachitzona haita prufa min hadarom. What does it mean, prufa? Okay, you imagine, okay, this curtain looks like a curtain of a stage. Right. And, you know, when you open the stage curtain, it kind of goes open a little bit, or you can lift up a bit of it. It's not exactly clear what it means. It's prufa, but it was somehow, again, you see a picture. The picture shows it one way. There's all different interpretations, how exactly. But you see here that it was prufa min hatzafon, min hadarom, sorry. The south side was a little bit open. It was ajar. Upnimit min hatzafon. And the inner one was open on the other side. So that's why when you look here, you can see it very well now. You see basically this opening of the first parochet, but the one behind it was closed. Mehalech benehem ad shemigia lasafon. Okay, next picture, 114. He's now, this is a great view because you really get to see, there's this 1 amma of space. Remember, there's always 1 cubit also for the Kohen to walk, right? He always needs an amma of space. So you could see here, the parochet didn't take up a lot of space. Back to your question, Debbie, about how much space. The parochet's very thin. So now the Kohen Gadol is walking. He's got his kaf in his left hand, his machta in his right hand, right? He's got his coals in the right hand, the ladle with the incense in it in his left hand. And he starts walking. Now he's walking. He went in the Darom side, but now he's walking Tzafona, north. He's facing north, going toward the next opening. So Ad Shemegia Latzafon. Higia Latzafon. Now he gets to the Tzafon. He goes in. He's now inside the room. Now he has 2 options. Theoretically, you might think he'd make a straight way to the Aron. Okay, notice here, by the way, the Aron is missing. Notice the Aron is not in this picture, right? Why is the Aron not in the picture? Okay, all you see here, so I'm trying to move this. I'm trying to hide this bar. Okay, I'll just move it. You see here, there's no Aron. There's just a space where the Aron was, okay? You don't see the Aron itself because in Bayit Sheni, there was no Aron. We're going to get to that. הגיע לצפון, הופך פניו לדרום, מהלך לשמאלו עם הפרוכת עד שהוא מגיע לארון. So what does he do? Instead of going on a diagonal from where he is in the corner of the room, walking to the center of the room where the aron was, or should have been, what does he do? He turns back southward. Okay, what does this sound like? To me, it sounds like those passport lines that you keep going, right? You were going this way, then, right, you turn. First he was going in the north direction. Now he comes in. He's on the next row. He goes in the south direction. Right? And then he goes until what? Ad shumigel aron, basically until he gets to the center of the room. And so he's going to stay alongside that parochet. He doesn't approach God right away. He's going to try as long as he can stay as far away as possible. He gets to the center of that room. Higia la'aron, what does he do? So he moves forward toward the space of the aron. He notenet hamachta ben shnei abadim. He puts down, now you really need the picture of Bayit Rishon. Okay, I'm going to show you here. Okay, let me stop sharing screen for a second and show you bigger. Here's a picture from Encyclopedia Karta of Beit HaMikdash B'Yerushalayim. So here you have the Aron. There are these tabaot, these rings on the sides. And from that, these 2 poles jutted out. They're called the Badim. So here's the floor. That's what you saw before. You saw just this space. But here's a Bayit Rishon where there's actually an Aron there. He puts it down between the badim, so right in the center of both of those poles. He puts it down, which is in front of the aron. He puts down his coal pan with the burning coals on it. Okay, let's pull up the pictures again now. And what does he do? Tzavar et haktoret al gabei hagchalim. He pours Okay, you see he has it in his hands here. There was a debate about whether he puts it in his hands or not. But in this picture, it shows him putting them in his hands. He pours all the coals directly onto the coal pan. And nitmale, here we go. We're at that moment. Nitmale kol habayit kulo ashan. Okay, you ready for the picture? Here it is. Whoa, the whole thing burns up in smoke. Okay, you see the whole room smoky. It's a great picture. Now, he's finished. So what does he do? Yatsa ubalo baderech beit knisato. He goes back exactly the same way he came and facing the same way he was facing. It's not like he turns around. No, he goes out exactly, starts walking backwards and goes out the way he came. Now he's already out of the Kodesh Kodeshim. He gets into the Heichal. Remember, nobody was in the Heichal, so he's there alone. Because remember, when you're in the Kodesh Kodeshim, no one's allowed to be in the Heichal, right? When you're in the Heichal, no one's allowed to be in the Bein Ulam LeMizbeach. Remember the whole sugya? Mitpalel tefillah tzara bebeit hachitzon. He says a small prayer, short prayer. The lo hayam ma'arich b'tfilato, right? He wants his prayers to get accepted, right? So he says his prayer, but short. Why short? Shelo lahavit et Yisrael. He doesn't want the people to get worried. He's very nervous about telling the people the people are nervous that maybe he died in Kodesh Kodeshim. So he keeps it very short. It's like, right, you're in shul, maybe keep davening short so you don't upset people, right? Other reasons. But he was very brief in his prayer because he didn't want the people outside to be nervous for too long. So he did what he did. Remember, by the way, he leaves the kaf and the machtai inside, right? He walks out not carrying anything, okay? Now you can sort of see why also, because the incense is burning there. You want to leave it burning. If he took the coal pan then, right, it wouldn't be able to continue burning. So now he then says this short prayer and goes out to tell the people that he made it alive. Okay. So now the Gemara starts off and says, we have a problem here with the Mishnah. B'maya skinan. What Beit HaMikdash are they talking about in this Mishnah? And you would assume they're talking about Bayit Sheni, because Mishnah always describes Second Temple. That's when they lived. That's when at least it was the closest to the time they were living. But remember, Bayit Sheni was in existence at the beginning of the Tannaitic time period. So, but what's the problem? There was no parochet in Bayit Rishon, so it makes sense. It was talking about Bayit Rishon. And then, but in the second temple, there was no Aron. And it says here, the Aron, it said Ben Abadim. It had to be an Aron there. How do we know there was no Aron? Mishenignaz Aron, we learned already that when they hid the Aron, which we're going to learn about when they did that, Nignezaimo, also that's in Senet Aman, a piece of the man, Sluchit Shemen HaMishtcha, the oil they use for anointing the kings and the Kohanim, the staff of Aaron with all the flowers on it and the almonds on it, the Argaz Sheshigru Plishtim Doron Lelohei Israel, and the gift that the Plishtim sent back when they sent back the Aron Kodesh. The gift they sent back, Shneimar uklei zahav asher yeshivotem lo hasham tasimu b'argaz mitzido v'shilachtem oto b'alach. It says put it in the argaz next to the Aron, and therefore what they said bring it back with the argaz that you're bringing the Aron, and they kept it there in the Aron all that time. Therefore, all these things that were also next to the Aron or in the Aron, they were also hidden at that time. Umi gnazo, who hid them? Yoshiyahu gnazo, Yoshiyahu did it. Umara Asha Genezo, why did he do it? Ra'asha Katuv, if you remember in Yoshiyahu's time, there was this huge reform in the temple, reformation, and he said, he found a Sefer Torah, and he realizes, oh my God, there's all these things we haven't been doing, does this whole reform, he gets rid of all the Avodah Zarah. And one of the things he saw there, it said in the Torah, Yolecha Shemotcha ve'emal kachasher takim alecha. God's going to send you to Galut. And I guess he saw the signs because he was not far from the end. He wasn't right up at the end, but he wasn't far from the Churban, the destruction. So Amadu Gnasa, we said, I don't want this to get into anyone else's hands. And he went and hid it. Okay, we've learned this already many times, or not many times, but we learned it before. We learned it in Masechet Shkalim. There's a whole debate, which we'll see in the next daf, which is, was it really hidden? Or maybe it was taken to Babylonia in the destruction. How do we know that he hid it? It's a way of understanding this very strange verse. Shneimar, it says in Yoshiyahu, Vayomer, and it's in Sefer, I think it's in Sefer Melachim, not Divrei Yamim, I forgot to check, but it's in actually Divrei Yamim, okay, when it describes it. There's a lot of parallels, right? They're both described in Divrei Yamim. It says in Chronicles, Vayomer leLeviim ha'mevinim l'chol Yisrael ha'kedoshim la'Hashem, he said to the Leviim, with some description of what the Leviim were, Tenu et Aron HaKodesh b'bayit asher bana Shlomo ben David melech Yisrael, put the Aron Kodesh in the house that Shlomo built. First of all, it was already there, so what do you mean? Ein lachem asa b'katef. You will no longer carry this. Remember, the Leviim were in charge of carrying the Aron during the desert when it moved from place to place. Atay v'du et Hashem Elokechem be'et amo Yisrael. Now your job is to worship God, meaning without the Aron. Okay, they assume, what does this mean? You're not going to carry it anymore because I'm hiding it, I'm putting it away, and that's the end of it. And that's why they say you hid the Aron. This is what leads to all sorts of things that happen historically with the Aron and what people claim happened to the Aron and all this mystery about where exactly is the Aron. Shuli Mishka wrote a great article this week on Flashback that describes different approaches among not only Jews, but Christians as well, right? Raiders of the Lost Ark, we've talked about before, that this search for the Aron, where is it? Right, well, the Yerushalmi says you're not allowed to search for the Aron. This Ivdu et Hashem Elokechem means go worship God. Forget about the Aron. You have other things to do. Don't waste your time trying to find it, even though there were people in history who did try to and claimed they knew where it was, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you can read Shuli Mishkan. Also, Rabbanit, Shiur, and Chamutal, and Daf Mishalehem also discuss this idea more from a bit of a philosophical perspective, or like how we're supposed to relate to this idea of the Aron being gone. They talk about in Daf Mishalehem this week. This is the topic for the week. So what happens now? So basically they say we're back to, and then that explains how he was gonez the Aron. What about all the others? Okay, they then say Shama. Rashi says it. Asher ba'ed lecha Shama is by the Aron. It says by Tzintzena Raman b'tein Shama, put there the Melo HaOmer. It says that Tzintzena Raman says L'dorot, and also by the Shemen HaMishcha, the oil. It says L'dorot Echem, and then it says Shemen Mishchat Kodesh Yezeh by the Shemen, and the Maklo David it says Mishmeret. Okay, so Mishmeret appears there, and Mishmeret appears also there. So again, they say all those words come to say that that all those things are learned from Gzera Shava, one from the other. So question, what are we? Mikdash Rishon, Mikdash Sheni, what's happening? So what do they answer? La'olam b'Mikdash Sheni. Umay higia la'aron, and we already know this because we saw the pictures. Mikom Aron. That's why it was interesting, right? The Encyclopedia Bein HaMikdash obviously described it. This picture was from the time of the first temple, the way they showed the picture. The picture, I shouldn't say obvious. That's what the fact that there was an Aron, it's obvious they were showing first temple. The pictures that I showed you from the Marot Yomi are from Bayit Rishon, Bayit Sheni, where there was no Aron and there was just a little space there. Maybe they demarcated it. I don't know if there's any source that there was actually something on the ground there, or they were just trying to show it in the picture, but it was the space of the Aron. So now they say, but it says he put it between the two poles. How could you understand it any other way? They say, no, he put it down as if it was between the two poles. And again, you have to imagine, you have to have a good imagination for where it was, where the poles were. It's actually not super complicated. And that's where he did it. Okay, last part for today. This opinion must go like the one who said, you put it all on at once. Remember? So 1 second, I just want to check one thing. Right. Okay. So tzovra means he puts it all on at once, right? Rather than scattering it very slowly. We discussed that already yesterday. Tanechad, and now we're going to have another machloket. Tzovra pnima shi chutza lo, v'tani idach tzovra chutza shi pnima lo. Okay. Here we're going to pull up the pictures again and see what this means. Tzovra chutza shi pnima lo means that when he puts down the coals, even though he puts them all at once, he kind of starts farther away from him, chutza, closer to the Aron, and then comes closer to him. He moves his way closer to him, all in the coal pan, but he starts there and makes a move toward closer to him. Okay? Or the second one was, sovra chutza shehi pnima lo. No, he goes away from the Aron. He starts closer to himself and then moves away. To which, and this is why I told you this in the beginning, we were going to end with this idea. Abaye says Tanai, it's machloket between two Tanaim, this idea. Va'amar Abaye mistabra kemanda amar pnima shi chutzala. So here's, right, remember that if you look at the pictures here, the Kohen's on the left side of the picture, because here's the handle. The coal pan is here. He starts farther away and then he goes closer to him. The second picture is he starts closer to him and then he goes farther away from him. Now, he says it's much more logical to say Pnima shichutzala, meaning he goes further in the room. In other words, closer to the Aron first, this picture, 118, and then goes closer to himself. Why? If you've ever lit in Hanukkah candles with a bunch of family members and you have Chanukiot that are in the back and Chanukiot in the front, you never light the front ones first, because then when you go to light the back ones, you're going to burn yourself. So it's exactly the same thing here. He says, Ditnan milamdimoto hizaher shelo tatchel mipanecha shema tikaveh. Says they taught him, don't start pouring it right in front of your face, because if the idea is you have to move in some direction, you definitely don't want to start by you and then move the incense further back. The smoke is going to start coming up and burn you. So basically start obviously farther away and come closer to you. It's interesting. Again, I think you don't really see the logic of the other side, but the other side must be, we want the Torah to be closer to where God is, right? Again, it's this concept of, we want it to be closer to where he is. Slowly get to God. Don't go to God right away, right? Put it there. No, put it in front of you to block your vision of things before you put it farther away. But the other opinion says, practically speaking, this is very dangerous and we don't want you to get burned. So we have to worry also about simple things like getting burnt, right? We all know that on Hanukkah, I mean, I don't know if you know this in Chutz La'aretz, but in Israel, you always hear on the news stories of kids who got burnt or people who got burnt, and it's dangerous and you have to do things carefully, even though it's a mitzvah. And, you can't just ignore the safety issues, right? This comes up in many, many cases. So, if you go back to Meron, right, it was a religious expedition, but you have to be careful of safety. So that's what they're telling you here, that he has to be careful not to burn. And therefore, again, we're back to the nitty gritty details that you have to do to make sure that things work properly, and not from a religious sense, but a very practical sense. With that, we'll finish for today. Have a great day, everyone.